Hey friends, Captain Alex Elmerman here, coming from the beautiful Bachelor Officers Quarters at Naval Station, Norfolk, Virginia, where the barber shop is closed. I've been mobilized to come down and help the Navy deal with some of its COVID-19 issues. But Pastor Lori asked me to maybe see if I could say something about Memorial Day, and I jumped at the opportunity. I know that for many of us, Memorial Day is a profoundly personal holiday. We've lost friends, we've lost family members, and this is a time to remember them directly. Fortunately, many of us don't have that personal tie to the holiday, and I know that it's kind of hard to wrap our brains around how to memorialize the 1.4 million service members who have died in uniform since the Revolutionary War. Well, I thought I'd help a little bit with that by telling you about one particular organization, a torpedo squadron called Torpedo Squadron 8, that played a critical role in the Battle of Midway. And I'm hoping that that'll help you as you think about celebrating this Memorial Day. Torpedo Squadron 8 flew these airplanes called torpedo bombers. They were two-person airplanes. They carried something called a Mark 13 torpedo underneath them. Mark 13 torpedo, by the way, developed and built by the Naval Torpedo Station, Newport, which is now the Naval Undersea Warfare Center right on our island. So that's kind of pretty cool. Torpedo 8 mostly flew the TBD Devastator. They had 15 of those, and they were just taking delivery of a new torpedo plane called the TBF-1 Avenger. Torpedo 8 had 15 of these old Devastators aboard their carrier on which they were stationed, the USS Hornet. They had 5 of the new Avengers literally on board the island of Midway because they were trying to bring the new airplanes out to the ship, and they weren't quite sure where it was yet. To give you a little bit of background on that Battle of Midway itself, I'd like to just sort of remind you of what it was like to be an ally in the spring of 1942. The fascists controlled pretty much all of continental Europe and pretty much all of North Africa. The fascists in the east, the Japanese, they controlled most of China. They controlled pretty much all of Southeast Asia. In December alone, they had taken the Philippines, Guam, Wake Island. They had wiped out the British fleet in the Indian Ocean, and they had taken out Singapore. They had launched a devastating attack against the American fleet, of course, on December 7, 1941, when a carrier strike group composed of 6 Japanese aircraft carriers, Hiryu, Soryu, Kaga, Akagi, Zokaku, and Suikaku, launched, of course, this devastating attack that we still remember today, in which most of America's battleship force was wiped out. And we, as the Allies, really thought that this was a war that we could potentially lose. America seemed to get rocked back on its heels right up until May 1942, so the month prior to the Battle of Midway. The Battle of the Coral Sea happened. What was happening there is the Japanese were trying to assault a place called Port Moresby in New Guinea, and at great loss of life and at enormous sacrifice, the American forces were able to barely eke out a victory against the Japanese forces. The Japanese had 2 of their aircraft carriers crippled and had to be sent back to the yards. Those carriers were Zokaku and Suikaku, 2 of the aircraft carriers that attacked Pearl Harbor. That was the first glimmer of hope for American forces. Our radio signals people and our code breakers started cottoning on to the idea that the Japanese were planning another evolution. They were planning to go ahead and attack the battle. They were planning to attack Midway. They were planning to attack Midway on the 4th of June, 1942. Well, what did we do? We decided that this was our opportunity to really strike a major blow against the Japanese. A guy named Raymond Spruance, who's an admiral at the time, worked for Chester Nimitz, was put in charge of a battle group, and they were sent out. That battle group had only 3 aircraft carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown. They went and they fought against the 4 remaining major Japanese aircraft carriers, Kaga, Akagi, Hiryu, and Soryu. We didn't know who was going to win that one. It was not a done deal. 6 in the morning. A little bit prior to that, radar operators on Midway itself began to see the incoming Japanese bombers. They launched all their airplanes. There was no point in having them just blown up right there when they were on the ground. 5 of the new TBF-1 Avengers from Torpedo 8, they seek out and they find the Japanese fleet, and they became the first American forces to make contact with the Japanese fleet and to, in fact, attack them. No other air cover. Low, slow, straight lines. Guess what? 1 of those aircraft made it back to Midway. So the 5, 1 made it back. The pilot of that one, and I wrote his name down, I want to get it right, Ensign Albert Ernest, and his torpedo man was Radioman Second Class Harry Ferrier. Planes went back and forth around 9 a.m. The Americans believed that they knew where the Japanese were, and they sent out their carrier air wings, their strike groups, to go and try to fight the Japanese. Well, guess what? We can't quite find them. We're going a little bit in the wrong direction. But the commanding officer of Torpedo Squadron 8, a guy named Lieutenant Commander John Waldron, believes that he knows where the aircraft are, where the aircraft carriers are. So he tells his squadron, follow me, and I will lead you to the Japanese, and we will attack them. He disobeys the orders of his carrier group commander and peels off on his own, and his men follow him. That was the kind of loyalty that he had engendered in them. They considered him to be a very trustworthy guy. Guess what? They, in fact, find the Japanese battle fleet. They radio back the coordinates of the battle fleet. They've got them. But guess what? They need to attack now. They're starting to run out of gas. They have no air cover. They're alone and unafraid. These 15 these 15 devastators. They descend down to 100 feet. They get slow. They fly in direct, straight lines at their targets. The Japanese have a combat air patrol of fighters up high above their carriers. They don't see any other American aircraft coming at them but this one squadron of torpedo bombers. So they all dive down out of altitude, and it is a turkey shoot. Between the anti-aircraft fire from the surface ships and the Japanese fighter planes, Torpedo 8 is annihilated. Every single one of those airplanes goes down. One survivor, a guy named Ensign George Gay, and that is it. All of them die. All of them knew that they were going to die. All of them, when they were in their attack runs, again, low, slow, straight lines, highly maneuverable, very fast, very effective Japanese fighter planes all over them. Flak coming up from the surface ships all around them. They stayed on mission and kept going. And guess what? Not a single one of their torpedoes scored a hit against the Japanese fleet. Every one of these guys died, feeling that he had failed in his mission. But they executed their mission anyway. And because they did, by the time the American dive bombers, the American fighters showed up, the Japanese defensive fighters were in no position to stop them from making their attacks. The Japanese defensive fighters were so low after going after those torpedo bombers that they could not defend against the SPD Dauntless dive bombers that came in and launched devastating attacks against the Japanese fleet. Absolutely crushed them. The battle went on for 3 more days. But by the end of that battle, there were 4 Japanese aircraft carriers at the bottom of the ocean: Kaga, Akagi, Hiryu, and Soryu. By the end of that battle, Pearl Harbor had been avenged. The 6 aircraft carriers that had attacked Pearl Harbor, 4 of them were on the bottom of the ocean, 2 of them were in the shipyards with major damage. The Japanese expansion of the Pacific had reached its high tide and would be defensive from there on in all the way back to the Imperial Court of Japan. Obviously, we won that war. And the reason why we won it in the Pacific, one of the major turning points, were the men of Torpedo 8. Both the ones who launched out from the island of Midway and the ones who launched out from Hornet. The thing they had in common, both of them alone, knowing that they were going to die, attacked. They attacked. And why did they do it? Well, they did it because of their sense of duty. And they did it because they believed in our country and what it stands for. And they believed in the cause that we were fighting for. You know, all of you know, and I wrote it down, I didn't want to screw it up, the quote from John 15:13, when Jesus says, "Greater love hath no man than this, to lay down his life for his friends." Well, the men of Torpedo 8 didn't just lay down their lives for their friends. They laid down their lives for their shipmates. They laid down their lives for their country. They laid down for all the succeeding generations around the world who have reaped the fruits of the peace, the American-led peace that came from World War II. You know, the great author Herman Wouk wrote a book called War and Remembrance. And in there, he talks about Torpedo 8, and he calls them the soul of America in action. I think these guys are very much worth remembering. I think it's very much worth it to pray for these families, for their descendants. And as we remember them, and we remember all of the people who have given their lives in service to our country this Memorial Day, I think makes sense to just sort of take a minute and to kind of bow our heads and to thank the Lord for men like this. Thank the Lord for all those through the centuries now who have fought and died under the banner of our country, for the freedoms that we all enjoy, for the responsibilities that go with those, to establish America's leadership role in a world that's desperately in need of principled and just leadership, to set an example for all of us of what selfless service really is. So this Memorial Day, my heart goes out to you. If you have close friends, if you have family members who died in uniform and you're memorializing them. If you don't have that, and looking for somebody to think about, I ask you to think about the people of Torpedo 8. I ask you to join me in prayer for them on that day and for all of our service people who are in harm's way every single day. It matters. And while you're at it, I appreciate you putting a prayer for me, kind of away from my family for a while. I got it pretty cushy here in this lovely Navy base here in Virginia. Certainly a lot easier than the people who fought in World War II. But we all need to pray for each other all the time. And we don't just lay down our lives for our friends. We live for our friends. And I sure do look forward to getting back to my friends there. Calvary, thank you very much. And God bless you all.